Kank. Render. That never gets old. It never gets old. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the, what are we calling now? The live stream / podcast. Every week, every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST, fellow expert cartoonists come to you live, y'all, to talk shop. Where else can you get that on the internet? Not a lot of places, I don't think.
Shippity shop.
Shippity ship shop. There's a, you remember clicking, what was it, Click and Clank? What is it? Clank? Car Talk.
Clank Brothers.
Yeah. And, you know, it's almost like they started a whole different, like, column of, you know, talking to people on the radio. And, you know, I always love the kind of back and forth between those two guys. But I feel like this is almost like a comic book version of Car Talk. But our name is Pencil to Pencil. Let me do my introductions. First, I have to start off with a hearty, well, hello. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. I am an author illustrator, currently on assignment with a series at Scholastic on the graphics imprint. Leon the Extraordinary is in stores now. The next book in the series will be out this time next year. I can hardly wait, and neither can you. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce my other co-host. He is known as the world heavyweight champion of webcomics. His name is Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Hello, guys. Good to see you.
Steve Conley, what do you do?
What the heck do I do? I write the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. It's on Webtoons, Tapas, Go Comics, everywhere you look online. There it is, waiting for you to be a new reader of the webcomic. I think I would be remiss. Is that the word, remiss?
Yes. A lot of remission going
on. Remiss?
Yes.
We did introduce the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the masked marvel of mark making, Mr. Mike Manley.
Oh, I forgot my mask.
Yeah, you keep forgetting that. You're going to get exposed.
You can't have a name like Mike Manley without leaning into the alliteration every chance you get.
You got to do the Stan Lee, Mike. Mike Manley. I love it. Mike, what do you do, Prixel?
What do I don't do? Today, boy, I was doing everything. I did laundry today.
Yeah, I hear that.
I draw 2 syndicated comic book strips, Judge Parker and the Phantom. And I have a secret project also currently actually under pen at this point. That I will announce maybe as a Kickstarter later on this year. But, you know, people have known my work for many, many, many years. Dark Hawk, Batman, Shazam. Much of your childhood. That's what I constantly get on social media. I got your first comic when I was 9.
You're my childhood.
You're my childhood. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that happens a lot, I see. But you know what is interesting now that we're getting older, that the generations are shifting, right? So I think sometimes you got to remind people what you've done, because some of these people are so young they've never seen it. You know?
Well, I do think that there are stratas in fandom, right?
Yes.
So I would say the bulk of people who read my work are over 35 now, probably. I mean, like a lot of fans now, when they come up, they have gray hair, starting to get gray hair, right? I mean, I have gray hair. They're starting to, and then you have people under 30 who probably don't really know my stuff as much. And if you're younger than that, you know, you might come across what I do on social media, but those people are reading very, you know, it's like a different universe, a different circle, a different orbit. So there's a lot of different orbits in fandom. And you have some people that will never read anything that any of us are doing. They're reading something completely, a completely different universe, a different orbit, you know. it's not, it's because it's not like, I mean, I guess you could stumble across my stuff or our stuff online, but you know, from when I was teaching the high school class, the way younger people find stuff is really unlike how we found stuff. We found
Right.
stuff by accident looking for other stuff. And the way they find stuff by accident is on YouTube telling them, oh, you might like this.
Yeah, they didn't find things behind the 7-Eleven like we
Right.
used to.
Right. Behind the, right. Like I remember there was one drugstore that had all the porn mags, but it also had heavy metal. And it also had all the Warren magazines.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and then it had a section of comic books. That doesn't exist today. So,
yeah,
you know, it's really interesting how younger people find stuff. There was no avatar that appeared in front of me when I was, you know, in a store saying, oh, by the way, you might like more of this.
Right. What about you, Steve Conley? As I'm sure we've got a couple of tiers of fans at this point, right? There's some people that checked in with you earlier in your webcomic career, and then there's fans of middle age, and you know, do those people intersect at all?
Somewhat, very kind people do, but when you jump genres, I found that there's often you lose people. But some people are science fiction fans, or some people really liked how I was trying to pretend to be Russ Manning when I was drawing Astounding Space Thrills, and now that I'm doing something more Bigfoot style,
Yeah,
looking, that was hard for a lot of people to. A lot of people, there were a few readers who were like, "Okay, I'll try Steve's new thing," but they're like, "Why is this guy's head look like a road cone?" They couldn't understand why I was intentionally drawing badly. I was drawing wrong, and I don't know. It's interesting that I have there. It's also very difficult for me to get fans of the middle age fans, like readers of the middle age.
I'm
to,
sorry.
no,
Sorry about that.
No. It's when I try to get readers in the middle age to go read Astounding Space Thrills, I say, "Oh, the sense of humor is largely the same, but the style is so different." I lose people. So really curious.
It's sort of interesting because for the bulk of the last century, adults read comics in the newspapers, and then the kids would read the comics after the adults read. And the newspaper had a wide variety of subjects and styles. So you had very, you know, quote unquote Bigfoot stuff, and then you had, you know, more realistic stuff, you know, a real wide gamut of styles. And then the direct market basically froze out anything but superheroes. And now that's sort of being, you know, frozen out by people who just read things online like manga and anime. You know, they're reading stuff based upon the Japanese cartoons or the cartoons that are turned into, or the manga that's turned into the cartoons. And they're never going to see a Thor comic, or they're never going to see Popeye, or they're never going to see Born Loser, right? They're never going to see.
Yeah, I just fell off my chair with that one.
Right, or like you know, there used to be like one panel cartoons. They don't see that stuff anymore. So it's sort of interesting now how everybody's being narrowcast, as they say. You know, everybody's like, "Oh, I just see this. I don't really know about that."
Right. Well, one thing I do know is that we have a fantastic guest in the green room. And for you guys that haven't joined us before, this whole live stream is coming to you from the idea that you could be a fly on the wall watching cartoonists talk shop with each other. And if you're watching us live, you get to interact with us and maybe ask a compelling question if you have one. We have a legend in the green room. I hope the Chex Mix is to his liking. Steve Conley, would you like to do the honors and introduce our guest?
Yeah, I think I could. Now, a proper introduction for Rick Veitch would take longer than our episode itself, so I'm gonna have to cut some corners here.
Yes.
But Rick started his cartooning career. I think I got this right. Apart from some work in like high school, Published in underground comics in the early 70s. Like we're talking about before there was really the kind of environment for the direct market of comics that came later. And we were the first class of the Hubert School, the famous Hubert School. If folks have heard of that, it's a legendary academy. And in the very first class, Rick Veitch, John Totalman, Steve Bissett. Before he even graduated, he was working for DC Comics. And he's gone on to assist people like Joe Kubert and Al Williamson. He is self-published tons of stuff, always doing creator-owned writing and drawing. Done legendary runs in DC Comics for Swamp Thing. Cooked up Constantine sort of as an aside. His self-published work, Brat Pack, MAXIMORTAL, The One, Roaring Rick's Rare Bit Fiends. Co-created with some guy, one of the first online comics communities in the 90s called comiccon.com. And at the time was really cheering on what was possible for distribution without the comic distribution system in the way, like going directly to retailers, going directly to readers, and has been just a force in getting creator-owned and creator-controlled work out directly to readers. And is doing that now with print on demand and using new distribution channels with his Sun Comics and his own King Hell Press. He's producing new books all the time. I think Boy MAXIMORTAL #4 just came out, and you can find it all at rickveitch.com. I'm skimming over tons of what he has done. He's the owner of EurekaComics.com, with some guy. Educational comics for learning and literacy. What have I glossed over? His collaboration with Alan Moore. Oh my goodness. Miracle Man, Swamp Thing. 1963, Gray Shirt with ABC for Wild Stuff. There's just so much. We can't possibly get to all of it. But okay, Teenage Ninja Turtles, Aquaman, and the Cartoonist Laureate of Vermont. Okay, so I think we've said enough. Let's. I don't know if he's left now already.
I think he melted.
And that's still skimming the surface. But Rick Veitch, I'm very happy to call him a friend, and I'm excited to have him here.
Hold on, I got to give you my Miyagi smile. That was real nice, Steve Conley. Very proud of you. All right, guys, welcome to Pencil to Pencil, Rick Veitch. Woohoo! Hey, Rick.
Hey guys.
Hey, we teleported you onto the ship. I hope everything's in place.
I heard all that, Steve. Thank you.
The check's in the mail, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I'm gonna let you guys get started. I'm gonna go hang out in the chat room and see if I can pull some questions out. Steve, why don't you get started since you had all that great stuff to say?
Well, if you've seen the show, if people have been here before, we know we like to talk about the origin story. We like to talk shop, but also what's really exciting, I think, is what Rick's doing with self-publishing and print on demand at the moment, specifically with his Sun Comics work. I think he even has a forum. If folks are watching on Facebook, if you're a creator, I think he's even hosting a party somewhere in there, like for people who want to learn more about print on demand. So, Rick, what's going on with that?
Well, it's just like I found a new way to do the comics I want to do without having to even think about marketing or publishers or distributors. It's kind of like at this late stage in my life, it's kind of like a reawakening that I can, fulfill my artistic vision without having to even think about those guys. And, I kind of resent, looking back at it, how much of their needs kind of got in the way between my vision and my audience. And so it's really nice now to be able to sit down and just do the kind of comic I want. And it doesn't really matter for retailers or any of that. It just sells directly to readers.
That's awesome. So that work, what's the process there? You got let's say Boy MAXIMORTAL #4. You create that, you finish the book, you've got a PDF, and then.
Yeah, well, it works with Kindle Direct. It's a really great system. It's sort of aligned with working with either Word or Pages, which is how you assemble it, into the PDF. But the format itself, I didn't bring any with me, but it's this beautiful little black and white format, and so I can do 108 pages and sell it for $9.99, which is a real decent price, and I make a couple of bucks on that, and I can do that. All I have to do is draw it and get it up there, and that's it. Get the word out, let people know that it's out there, and it sells. It's kind of like a backlist numbers thing, where you don't get the big diamond hit and then it's forgotten. It's more like you get an initial bunch of orders, but then it continues to sell.
So
day after day.
So people put this on. They get this on their Kindle. They download
No,
it?
these are paperbacks and hardcovers now.
Oh,
too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little format. It's amazing what they have done. I'm surprised that more people haven't plugged into it.
That's awesome. And you're also putting your backlist, making that now available through them as well too. So anyone who missed the one and Rare Bit Fiends can get it.
Yeah, and Brat Pack, I just got a cheap paperback version of that out. And so that's like this perennial seller, and people coming in will be looking for Brat Pack, and then they'll go, wait, what's this PANELVISION stuff he's doing? And they'll take a flyer or a chance on that, and that really allows my creativity to kind of blossom, and I can just try really wild stuff that I could never sell an editor on or convince a distributor to carry.
So there's a printer printing the book and sending it individually to each person who's purchasing it. Is that how it works?
That's right. It's on Amazon.com. This is all owned by Jeff Bezos.
Right.
They they show the book for sale on Amazon. They take the order, they print the book, they fulfill the order, and every month I get a royalty check like clockwork. And they're printed all around the world.
Wow.
It's not just a single printer. They've got these places all around the world that do this. So,
and can you get different types of stock? Like, is it all one type of book, or you can say, oh, I want a 10-point cover, or I want.
No, I mean, it's you can't get all the bells and whistles. They've got 2 or 3 basic but really solidly well done and thought out packages.
Okay.
I just started doing the hardcovers. It's just phenomenal. Like a beautiful book that they produce at a very reasonable price.
And awesome. So do you make a higher percentage from that than you would if you were selling, per issue copy through the regular, diamond and direct market?
Yeah, and it's much simpler and easier on me because I don't have to jump through all the hoops that Diamond demands or do all that crazy marketing that you got to do to be seen in that. And that whole market is a dwindling market. I mean, we're all old enough to have watched it kind of be destroyed in the 90s, the whole dream of what it could have been. And it's just been sort of going dwindle down the drain ever since. I think Image announced today that they're pulling out of Diamond.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
That just happened this afternoon. Yeah.
So I wonder who they're going to get to fulfill their.
Well, they mentioned it, but I didn't read. I didn't read that far.
They're going to go with Lunar.
I was at it, Lunar. Yeah.
But Diamond, which kind of took over everything in the monopoly 20 years ago, is now like a wholesaler. It's like they've lost everything.
Yeah.
And the poor retailers are going nuts too. So it's just a mess what they did, and I see it as big a catastrophe as the Dr. Wortham stuff in terms of what it did to our art form and the promise that was there as we were all working together to build a direct sales market in the 80s.
Right. Well, I guess this might dovetail a little bit into like you guys doing the Comic-Con .com idea back in, well, before the internet blew up the first time, right?
Yeah.
And how did you guys, you and Steve, meet?
Yeah.
I'll let Steve tell the story.
The Spirits of Independence tour that Dave Sim put on. I was familiar with Rick's work, of course, and but Dave Sim, who is the comic Cerebus, he got together with a bunch of other independent cartoonists, and there was a kind of a second. They were attempting to stoke a second wave of self-publishing. There was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles boom, and then there was another one. There was a second one of those, and riding that wave was this Spirits of Independence tour. The idea that independent creators, could get a toehold, and if your work was good, it had a chance. That was sort of the thing, and quite a few people: Rick, Steve Bissett, Paul Pope, I don't know, Don Simpson,
Yes,
Bat
Smith.
Lash, tons of creators were doing wonderful work, and they set up individual sort of like SPXs or MoCA or APE conventions in cities. Each cartoonist would team up with a local retailer and they'd have a convention in different cities. And at those events, I signed up to go. I had my terrible black and white comic at the time. Not my current terrible comic. It was a different terrible comic. And I set up at one of these conventions, and that's where I met Rick. And I think it was at the next event, I was going down to breakfast one morning, and Rick said, "Hey, you're one of the cartoonists. Join us." I was going to sit at a table, eat a waffle by myself or something like that. He invites me over. Next thing you know, I'm sitting at the periphery of him and Colleen Duran, maybe Bat and Lash, all talking shop, and I'm just eating eggs and learning. And we stayed in touch after that. And I was doing website stuff, and Rick had and still has a bazillion ideas. And Comic-Con.com grew out of that, kind of taking that concept of a comic event and let's do it all the time.
But I think what really attracted me to what you're doing was that you were one of the first guys to do a computer comic. And I had done one with my neighbor, a short story for Taboo that we did on his Amiga.
Awesome.
That's how far back this goes. It's probably like 80. I don't know what year it was. I bet you it was like 87 or 88 or something.
That's amazing. Dot
Yeah.
Matrix.
Yeah. And so I could see how it could, revolutionize comics. Just watching how he did it, like there was no Photoshop even in those days.
No.
There was like some graphics program that came with the Amiga that he was able to put all this stuff together in, and it was just unbelievably difficult, but he did it. And then you were the first person I saw, other than Shatter, I think, Mike Sens.
Sure.
Yep. But I think you were the first one I saw in the flesh, where you had this comic that you had made on a computer. And so that's I made a beeline over to your table and started talking to you, because I could just see it was coming.
And it was such a vibrant community. It was so exciting. It was such a great time to be creating comics. And we still have pockets of that. That's what joining this this team here at Pencil to Pencil. That's what I feel like it's like. There's still a bunch of us out there who are like, this is awesome.
Yeah. So you know what? There's a question already, Rick, from our good buddy, Notorious JRD, J. Robert Deans from YouTube, says, and this is kind of at the beginning of your intro. Hang on, Rick. You format your work through Word? You want to talk a little bit about your process?
Well, in the case of the Kindle system, they work either with Word or with, if you've got a Mac, they'll work with Pages. And it's beautifully set up for that, but you can't use Adobe. Adobe gets kicked back, and there's some extra code in Adobe PDFs that drives the whole system crazy. So I format my Kindle Direct books using my Mac and Pages, which is the equivalent of Word.
Wow. Cool. Thanks for that, JRD. That's very interesting.
And you're working all digitally now, Rick, right?
Not 100%. I still take commissions, and of course I do those. But when it comes to any sort of production work, it makes so much more sense to use the Cintiq and Clip Studio Pro, which is just like the greatest software of all time.
Yeah.
And the Cintiq is just an unbelievably beautiful device. I have to say, not only saves time, but it saves wear and tear on the body. You don't have to press with your wrist as hard. And a lot of people my age who've been drawing and lettering comics their whole lives are complaining about their wrists now. And I've been able to lighten up the whole feel of it just by using the stylus. So yeah, I'm mostly digital, and I think anybody has got to work straight digital these days if they want to compete in a production environment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I use it to do both strips now, even though I love the original, the fact that you can produce it faster. And to be honest, it's also easier on your eyeballs,
Yep.
because you have the big screen, you can see the stuff. And it's funny because we were talking about Al Williamson before we went on. I remember when I was sharing the studio with Brat Blevins, he and I were sharing the studio, and Al was having trouble with his elbow, and he was going to the doctor. And I mean, he was, I guess he was in his mid-50s then, and he was just like a demon. He could ink like 5 pages a day, depending upon who it was. And he started getting this like bursitis or like tennis elbow, where he would sit, and the doctor said he sort of had to raise where his ink bottle was from where it was.
Yeah.
And then it sort of went away. But there for a while, he was having that issue because he was doing so much work.
Yeah. And I think Dave Sims' wrist has been ruined. Like he has a really hard time writing and drawing now.
Wow.
And I think he's had surgery on it. But he lettered 6,000 pages of Cerebus,
Right.
Wow.
and drew them, so you can imagine the wear and tear on the appendage. But the digital environment really helps that. But I think it also helps in terms of time, how quickly you can pull stuff together, how you kind of really don't need the penciling stage anymore. I'll do like tight blue line layouts and then ink right on top of that, because if I make a mistake, I fix it.
Right.
Rick, let me ask you a question about that, because and knowing Steve, and we've just met, but knowing Steve as long as I have, and seeing that you guys were kind of like in a very small wave of comic futurists. I think Scott McCloud gets a lot of credit for his books and stuff, but there were people already on the ground doing this stuff, during all of that. And did you ever run into maybe resistance from other creators? Like, were you going around in the convention like, you guys, if you just did this on the computer, it would take you like half the week? What kind of pushback did you get from other creators, or did you just keep it to yourself?
Well, I think my generation of baby boomers, it's really hard for them to adapt to new technology and to learn new software. I mean, it's really hard for me to do it. And then once you learn it, they change it. So you're living this constant frustration level to do your thing, and a lot of people my age just don't want to do that. They know how to pencil and ink, and this stuff can be scanned in later anyway. So there was a lot of resistance, especially in the beginning. But I think the futurism thing that Steve and I saw was distribution, how to bypass this chokehold that Diamond and DC and Marvel had gotten on the pipeline of comic books and what the art could be. And that's what inspired Comic-Con.com. And we were always trying to find new ways of doing it. Like Steve came up with toon casting, which was like this little window with an ad and like a daily strip in there, and you give it away for free to websites.
It's what you all call the share button now. And the embed tag. That's what you call what you call the embed tag now. That didn't exist back then. That's how long ago we're talking.
Yeah.
But we knew it was a good idea. We knew it was a good idea.
Well, I find that that's a really important note that you guys are talking about, because one thing about comics is that there's always a big, even traditionally, there was a big resistance to making any kind of change. The previous generations didn't want to change, and they really didn't have to change, right? They didn't have to go digital, but our generation, my generation, right in the middle of your career, you could see like you guys are saying, you could see it was coming, and the companies are not going to tell you, well, you better go get a computer and you better learn how to use that stuff, because then one day they just go like, oh, well, like, we don't have an art director anymore. We don't have scanners. We don't have a bullpen. We don't have all these things that existed for the entire history of the business. And like I could see it coming around 1994. I got my first computer, my first Mac. And you could see, because the other part of publishing had already fully embraced all that technology already.
But it was like hugely expensive at that point.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
Like my first scanner, was like $1,500.
Yeah.
And the cable was like a garden hose.
Yeah.
You
and
dim
the
the
memory,
lights in the neighborhood when you scan.
the memory was like incredibly expensive. Like, I think the first Performance came through with what, like 8 megs or something. And then just to add another rack of 8 megs would be like $350.
Right.
Rick, do you remember kind of like what your rig was like back in that time frame? Like, were you did you have an early Mac? Were you kind of like trying to figure it out on Windows? What were you working on? Back then?
My first one that I owned was a Mac Performa. And I think Steve might have taught me how to copy and paste. And then my second one was one of those bubble iMacs.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I couldn't draw with the mouse, although Steve was drawing with the mouse, which was unbelievable to me. But then I got my first little tiny tablet, and that made a huge difference right there. Although there was still like this lag because the computers just weren't fast enough to do it. So it really wasn't working. It really didn't work until like about 10 years ago, I think, when the Cintiqs and the fast iMacs came around.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just saying, I remember that because I had my 94. I bought my 8100 Mac, and I got pretty soon after that, I got the Wacom tablet. And you're right, you would go line, 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 line. Yeah. So, and you were looking at the screen. So you were drawing, but looking. And that took a while to also, I'm very used to it now. But in the beginning, it was sort of a disconnection because you're always used to looking at your line and the pressure of, the paper and the pen and and that was but I did like it, but you could see, like I said, you could sort of see that was the way that it's going now. And now it's funny to think that there are people who are doing cartooning in their entire career. They will never draw it on a sheet of paper. They will never. Their whole way of working is reliant upon the digital realm.
And now we're heading into this new time with artificial intelligence. And our generation might be the last people to actually draw. Because what kid is going to learn to draw when they can just make an image, either by voice or by typing in a few words?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's really scary.
Yeah, the kids are growing up now will be the last ones to encounter a screen that isn't a touch screen. It's all going to be so much more interactive, and it's great. Well, jumping back a bit, we talked about this before, right before we got on, was we talking about that first class of Hubert. If it's okay if we jump back there, I'm super interested in that. I know when you had we mentioned you were the Cartoonist Laureate of Vermont, which is awesome. Your acceptance speech was sort of delayed because of COVID.
Yeah.
And you have to tell a story about how you got there. how you got into Kubert and how the state helped. And I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you want to share any of that? Can you?
Basically, I had been working in a wood stove factory in Vermont, and I got laid off. So, I all of a sudden I qualified for programs. And in those days, there actually were job training programs that the government put on. And the one I got involved with was CETA, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act. And it was originally designed to teach people trades like plumbing and electrician and stuff like that. But I had been reading the New York Times one day, and there down in the corner was this little tiny ad, like 1 inch. And it said, Joe Hubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art opening, da, 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 da. And I sent in a postcard. Thankfully, I did it, I got a thing back from them, and they said, come on down and meet Joe, So I drove down to New Jersey from Vermont and got to meet Joe and Muriel Hubert, which was just a complete mind blower, I've been digging Joe's work since I was like a wee tinker, I was surprised at how young he was, because I knew he went back to the golden age, but he was like in his early 50s then, and he looked like he was in his 30s. The guy was like a rock. He really was. And had my portfolio. I had Two-Fisted Zombies, my underground comic there. And I was really embarrassed about it, because I thought, oh, underground comic, and he loved it. He picked it up, and there was like this gleam in his eye. Like he said, you did this? And he like went through every page, and he was just like grinning like a kid. And, I was like, wow. He reached over and pulled out a copy of Pilot from France and said, have you seen these guys from France yet? And there's Giraud and Drulier. And that was the first time I ever saw their work. It was like in his office. He said he wanted me to go to the school, and it was, early summer at that point. I had no money, and Muriel directed me towards CETA. And so I went on my quest, working my way up through the state, various offices in the state, trying to convince them to send me to comic book school, because, it really didn't fit. I made it all the way to the lady who ran the whole state program. Wow. And she had me on the phone. She was looking at my samples, and she said, I see a lot of supermen here, but I don't see any super women. And thankfully, I wasn't too stoned. I said, that's what I need to learn. Nice. And it worked. It worked. She said, okay, I'm going to put this before the board, And so I thought I was in, and I let Hubert know. And then she came back a week later and said, well, we can't really make this decision until October. And of course, school started in September.
Right.
And I had to tell Joe this. And Joe said, I've been talking to Muriel about you. Come on down. We'll figure something out. So basically, he said, come to the school, even though I really couldn't pay for it at that point. I had this hope that this grant was coming through, but it wasn't there yet. So I went down with like a box of groceries and $15 in my pocket and an old bicycle. And there I was at Hubert School. And it was just a complete mind bender how great it was. All of us that in first class, like we were all out in the hinterlands. So we had never really found our tribe yet. And here we were. A lot of varied levels of fandom, but there we were, and it was really, really, really exciting. It took about a month for the grant to come through, but basically my fellow students and Joe and Muriel supported me for that month until the grant came through. Then I was the rich kid. Not only did it pay for the school, but they sent me like a check for $50 a week.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, whoa. And so my life just sort of flipped right there. And
how were you living were there dorms there? Were there?
there was the old carriage house at the mansion. The school was in this old mansion, which was like amazing, with a swimming pool and like about 6 acres of grounds all around it. So we were insulated from the craziness of normal New Jersey Route 46, in this own little cartoon heaven. And of course, meeting Bissett, like right off the bat, we were like, 2 peas in a pod. He had been reading underground comics. He was the first person I ever met who actually went out and bought Two-Fisted Zombies and read it.
Wow.
Up to then, it had just been people I had given copies to, my friends, and they didn't know what to make of it because they didn't understand comics. But he plugged right into it, and and he had a comic called Abyss, which he had done in college, and he gave me a copy of that, and it had 2 or 3 pieces in it that were just killer, absolutely killer. And we started almost immediately collaborating on crazy underground comics at the same time as we were doing, stuff with Joe and working, not only doing the curriculum, but Joe had a studio set up. So at night, as long as you had all your assignments done, there was paying work.
Wow.
Putting together catalogs and these weird paste up jobs and mechanicals and stuff. And so we got this double kind of, it's like, not only did I get my bachelor's, but I got my master's at the same time, and made money doing it.
And how was the curriculum set up? Like, how did the day go?
It was kind of like a normal school. You'd go in and you'd have a classroom thing where, Joe or one of the teachers would, teach some aspect of art, and then you go down and have studio time, and then the same thing would happen in the afternoon.
What were some of the other faculty members, or was it pretty much Joe and a couple other?
No, it was Rick Estrada, Dick Giordano, Hy Eisman, who's like, the emeritus of cartooning now.
Yeah.
Let's see, Kelly, who else was in there? Erwin Hazen taught for a while. A couple others whose name escapes me, but it was a really, really, really amazing time in my life. It was like the planets aligned, and I got to the place where I was going to get the training I needed, and the timing was extraordinary in the sense that the old comic book distribution system was in a state of collapse. The mom and pop stores were all going out of business right and left, and the independent news distribution was corrupt, from top to bottom. So a lot of the old guard were leaving comics, and I think that might have been part of Joe's reasoning for starting the school, because he might have been looking at his world of comics and going, "Wait, this isn't going to be around for a while." But by the time we graduated, it had already started to grow out of that. Heavy metal had come out. And people all of a sudden could see, like, wait, there's this whole other market for adult comics that we could follow. And of course, Steve and I and John and Tom Yates and all those guys just jumped right on that.
And Rick, and who else was in your graduating class?
Let's see, Tom Yates, who now does Prince Valiant. He's doing a killer job too on that. Bissett, of course, myself, Ken Fedunowitz, who worked at Marvel for many years, Ron Zalmy, who worked at Marvel for many years, Rick Taylor, who worked at DC for many years, Kara Sherman, who great underground cartoonist who passed away at a too young early age, Elaine Heinel, who ended up going to Japan and having a whole cartoon greeting card thing built around her in Japan.
Wow.
There were others, Betsy Ambielli, Sam Kajava, Mark D'Amico. It was really, really wild times, very high energy.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys were the X-Men back then.
Yeah. Well, I guess I've always thought that, to me, the 3 smartest guys in comics were Will Eisner, Joe Kubert, and Neil Adams, because those guys were business minded, and Joe having that school and sort of running it in a way like the way he probably learned by being in you know, in Eisner's shop, or you know, you learn all the different parts of the craft. You learn the lettering, and you learn, you know, everybody in the old days, those guys learned everything. They didn't just pencil. They had to ink, they had to letter, they had to.
Yeah. I mean, I was trained in all that stuff. I came out of Hubert School knowing every aspect of how to make a comic right through production. And a bunch of my first jobs, like with Al Williamson, were assisting him, either lettering or doing backgrounds and stuff.
Do you remember what those jobs were?
Sure. I started with The Empire Strikes Back. I lettered that, and I got there. He and Carlos were working on it, and Al, as you know, was a reference artist.
Yes.
He had to have his reference, and they had a stack of photographs from the movie, but the special effects stuff, they didn't have anything. He didn't know what Yoda looked like. He had 2 Polaroids of the walkers, the little models that showed nothing. So Al was flipping out. You know how you could fret, you know, when you didn't have what he wanted. And so I have worked on cars and stuff, and I sort of have a basic understanding of how machinery has to kind of work. So I said, let me try to sketch this out and see if I can figure it out for you, Al, even though I was letterer. And so I started working it out on tracing paper and figuring out, you know, how the joints worked and how the neck would work and stuff like that. So he could see it from different angles and stuff. And he put me right to work doing the backgrounds for that whole sequence of the walker thing. And we nailed it. I mean, he inked it and of course made it a million times better. But all those walkers were penciled by me.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny because now when anybody does any of this stuff, there's so much material. But yeah, back then it was hard because Brett Blevins did one of the Indiana Jones, and I helped him a little bit on that. And that's when we were sharing a studio with Al. And yeah, you would get a photo of something from one side, but never a photo of something from the other side. And there was hard getting good, clear shots of the actors. Well, now if you want Harrison Ford, you just Google and you get Harrison Ford from every angle, even angles you never want, right? And so it was much harder. I remember Al did have a big stack for Blade Runner.
Yep.
That I think because Archie worked on that, and I think because of that, he had like, I don't know, it seemed like a 3 or 4 foot stack, like every scene of the film.
Yeah. And he would like project it with the artograph and trace it out and then hit it with his inking, and it was just the most extraordinary illustrations. Absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, he was a guy that really he had a very complex way of working, but then he pulled it all together because he'd have something he drew and then a photograph from some other source and then a photograph he shot.
Yeah.
You know?
And then Carlos doing the machinery in the background and stuff, or my wife and I might show up for the weekend and hang out, and I'm drawing the rocks in the Superman story where Superman has the beard, like all those little meteorites. That's me.
Wow, that was a great story. It was
a great story.
I had Xeroxes of all that stuff. I was just looking at some actually the other day.
Did you get photographs of you and then ended up being drawn in the strip?
No, but he said if he had been doing Flash Gordon, he would have had me as Bolton, the king of the Hawkman. Yeah. But I did do that same thing on a few things. I penciled a Walker on a cover, and he was doing something with Leonard Starr that never I think they only did one chapter, but I penciled some backgrounds. But I did learn from him. That was a very interesting thing of how he could take a photograph and he could put it in the projector, and then he would draw it, and it would look like an Al Williamson drawing.
Yeah.
It didn't look like a photograph. It looked like, you could tell he was using a photo reference, but it looked like an Al Williamson drawing.
Yeah.
He had that, just had that touch. So he helped. I did a Star Wars job, and he showed me, well, and he was sort of the show me. I don't know how that would compare with Hubert, because Al was like, he could show you. If you asked him how to do it, he couldn't tell you how to do it, but he could show you how to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how Joe was as a teacher.
Well, Hubert had an actual curriculum that he put together because he and his partner, Norman Morey, tried to start an mail-in school in the 50s. And they put together this whole thing of like what they were going to teach. And I think it was kind of based on the famous artists, which a lot of those guys had taken. And so when we got there, I was really impressed by how well organized Joe's curriculum was for the first year. The only thing we didn't get was writing. He had, in the catalog, he had said he was going to have writing, but he wasn't able to get a good writing teacher in until the second year when Kanigher came.
Oh, that would be interesting.
That was interesting. Kanigher, legend has it that Kanigher failed everybody in his class.
That's fantastic.
That's amazing.
Kanigher was like enemy ace. That was his personality. Von Hammer, this lonely, everyone's sort of like looking at, and kind of like alienated from. That was Kanigher.
That's amazing. Everybody fails. That's amazing.
A weird story. It was in that second year, and in the morning we were all sort of congregating in the downstairs area of the mansion, and word came that Mort Weisinger had passed away. And now, if you know your history, Kanigher and Weisinger had locked horns for decades, and at one point, I think Kanigher had a nervous breakdown over the office politics. So it was like a big thing. And Kanigher was standing next to me, and when he heard the words that Weisinger was dead, his whole body just like shook, right? And then he stepped up onto the staircase above where we were all standing, and he pretended that he had like a Shakespearean robe like this, and he gave this Shakespearean speech about how he had won because he survived and Weisinger was dead.
Wow. Yeah. When you start studying, you get a little bit of that history. DC was kind of a weird place, and I always felt, even when I started, it was sort of like the secret handshake club. Like it was a very different vibe than when you would go to Marvel. It was kind of like very open, sort of like a free for all, whatever. But DC was like, my first day in DC, Julie Schwartz came out in the hallway and told everybody to shut up.
Yeah.
So I was like, whoa, okay. Yeah. It was very, So a lot of those guys sort of had beef with each other.
Yeah. There was a lot of politics that went back, and it went back to like the 50s. This was a generation that had sold out our art form with censorship to save their business. They had started the Comics Code, and it made comics moronic right there. Comics had been trying to grow and become what they needed to be, and they squished it right there. They kind of, strangled it in the cradle. And I think they all felt very cynical about it. There were very few of them that really had that love. Joe Kubert was one of them. Archie Goodwin was one of them. Al Williamson was one of them. These guys were still kids at heart. And when you got talking about comics, you knew they loved it. But I ran into many cynical jerks that hated comics, hated the readers, despised the material. And that's kind of what inspired Brat Pack in a sense.
Is that
Really?
it's interesting with the class, with all the teachers there, many of them coming from DC and Marvel and places like that. But the students who came out of there all seem to be very independently minded, and like they're going to write and draw their own comics, and they're going to do their own thing. It's weird that almost a factory setting produced, I don't know, these individuals.
Joe Kubert is a self-publisher.
Mm-hmm.
He and Norman Moray started 3D Comics.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they made a bundle doing that. They had a great deal with St. John. And so Joe at heart was a self-publisher. And he was really good as obviously as an illustrator and a communicator in comics. And he was a really good editor, and he did the job right for DC Comics. But I don't think he ever felt like that was his role in life, was going to be to, at DC Comics for the rest of his life. He had also, connected with Europe. He'd been to Europe, and the Europeans had come to see him. Just before Hubert School opened, the whole heavy metal crowd, the Humanoids guys, showed up and visited Hubert, and that's why he had that book with Drulier and
Rick, I have a question about that. Just thinking about the kind of like the energy surrounding your graduating class, because it seemed like you guys were a group of individuals, right? Everybody came in there self-publishing or making mini comics and things like that, and zines. So I know a lot of the energy of, say, SVA later is like, it's kind of like a farm system for Marvel and DC. You get in here, you get picked up, and you're working on something over there. But did a lot of you kind of graduate and then just kind of find more energy to do your own work, but you got kind of sidelined by doing mainstream stuff? If that makes sense.
What happened is, when we got out, there was this big collapse at DC. They called it the DC implosion, and that part of that was because the distribution was drying up, but also part of it was Jeanette was. They were trying to force Jeanette out. Jeanette had been brought in by the guy who bought DC Comics. I can't remember his name. So the old guard of men who had been there for 30 years really resented her. And she had tried to start this whole new line and to break out and whole kind of thinking, and somehow they had subverted that. And so DC kind of imploded. They canceled, I think, a dozen titles. There was no work for anybody, much less students, Hubert School students. So we were kind of left dangling there, where we thought we were being set up to, move right into DC, but we were kind of like dangling. But over at Marvel, they opened their arms and said, "Yeah, come on in," especially Rick Marshall. Rick Marshall was editor of the Black and White line. And there was like a undergroundy vibe to those titles, that even though he's like really conservative person, like he seemed to kind of dig that kind of stuff. And as soon as we got there, we started getting gigs. Part of it, I think, at least in my case, was that I had taught myself how to use an airbrush a little bit. And airbrush was like the thing. They all wanted the airbrush.
That was the 80s, right? Late 70s, early 80s. That was the big deal. That was sort of the big style then.
Yeah. And so we started out in the black and white books. And then when they decided to do Epic, we were just like right there at the right time. And, everything kind of fell into place right there. But it also, I have to say this, is like, I think working with Al Williamson helped me at Epic, because Archie Goodwin ended up taking over as editor. And like one day I went in with my first story that I had written and drawn myself, and instead of Rick Marshall, here's Archie Goodwin. And this is right at the time that I'm just starting to help Al, and Al was like really happy that I had solved his problem with drawing the walkers. So I think he probably like called Archie and went like, "Hey, this Rick guy is really cool," and it kind of opened the door. And Archie really, he gave me the keys to the kingdom right there, where I was writing and drawing my own stories that I owned. You know, it's like I didn't have to work in crappy comics. You know, I had this, all of a sudden had to showcase in Epic magazine. So that was a really great time for me.
Wow.
That's right. Between that and Vertigo, there aren't many people who have creator-owned stuff at both of those companies. That's wild.
Yeah. But I think what happened was that, you know, Epic was a newsstand magazine, a package for the newsstand, and the newsstand was drying up. And then Alan Moore hit at DC, working with my friends John and Steve on Swamp Thing, and all of a sudden, the energy for what, you know, pulp comics could be changed. They went from being worthless, useless, you know, not worth reading, to like amazing, like overnight, just because of what Alan brought to it. And so that brought me back into DC and to become involved with regular comics again.
It was exciting. It was an exciting time because nobody also really knew where, you know, the sky was sort of the limit at that point. You could really feel there was a different energy going on, and a lot of the old guard had sort of had retired.
Yeah, and the direct sales market was just coming online. I can remember, like in the early '80s, being in Archie Goodwin's office, Jim Shooter coming in and talking about how amazed he was that he had been to the store in the Lower East Side that sold comic books, and there was this comic book about an aardvark. and that was the first I ever heard of Cerebus.
What was his take on the aardvark?
Excuse me?
What was his take on the aardvark comic? Was he saying this is that he can't believe it exists, or?
Well, it was like this, the light bulb went on that there was this whole other way that they could be moving forward, or at least exploring. There'd been discussion of this direct sales market going back to when we were originally at Hubert School. Mike Friedrich came and talked to the school and told us that the whole thing was being set up, and he said, this is going to be the future, guys. But it hadn't hit the business heads at Marvel until the early '80s, when they really started getting behind it. And same with DC.
I want to jump into the future a little bit. There's some interesting questions in the chat. JRD is turning into the MVP of this episode. JRD says, to maybe jump forward a little bit, Rick, is there a difference in how modern readers just discovering your work today, like Brat Pack, react to it from how readers reacted to it when it was originally released?
Well, I don't think it's seen as outrageous as much as it was at the time. I mean, now The Boys is on television.
Right.
I was watching an interview with Barack Obama, and they asked him what he liked for television. He said, "I like The Boys." And you know that those guys were working the same side of the street that I was with Brat Pack. Brat Pack is an underground comic that just happened to be published within the mainstream, the context of the mainstream. I really am an underground cartoonist that kind of snuck his way in to work in the mainstream, and also to, you know, to sort of feed off the gravy train as well. But I think I don't get pushback on Brat Pack like I did in the beginning, especially the early reaction to the Midnight Mink, who was like this overtly gay character who's like abusing his sidekick, sexually abusing it, and this was like really hurtful to like gay people. There weren't any gay characters at the time in comics, and so I think I stepped on a lot of toes by doing that, but I just felt that it was built into the context of superheroes, and that they were operating and using this to sell comics to kids without overtly saying it. Basically, I wanted to bring out the kink that I was seeing in superheroes, and that when I talked to some of these cynical editors, they were actively using.
Really?
Yeah, they understood that, the gay subtext of Batman and Robin very much.
So they were purposely doing things with his youthful ward to put a subliminal message in.
Well, it's more like they were doing wise ass stuff in there. And you go back and you look at it and you can see it. But they understood that there was like a Freudian aspect to superheroes, and that was part of the appeal. And they'd been able to shape it in a way so it fit under the radar of the comics code, but it was still there. And that's what I was trying to point out with Brat Pack. I mean, I didn't just focus on the gay subtext. I also focused on vigilantism and that kind of stuff. I mean, all this was, I think, somewhat prescient. Comics now superhero comics are like a big promoter of vigilantism, and vigilantism is a big problem in this country right now. And I kind of blame the corporate strategy of just focusing on this very limited dark aspect of superheroes and not allowing different ideas or the other ideas that are embedded in the superhero to come forth.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because, and also the cynicism, because I also think that there's artists I admire who that they were kind of bitter bees, and maybe for legitimate reasons. I mean, a lot of those guys who worked in the Golden Age and the Silver Age, they weren't making a lot of money, and they had a lot of guys coming out of the war, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. But I always found it sort of interesting that a guy like Jack Kirby, who had a lot of turbulence, never seemed to be really that bitter about stuff. And like Hubert, he was constantly reinventing himself. He was a businessman. I mean, people sort of forget the fact that in the 50s, he had his own company and things like that. So that there was a lot of that with certain people like Joe, Hubert, and even Wally Wood was like that. He was trying to do his own thing. Even Gil Kane tried doing his own.
They did.
His own thing.
Yeah, and they all got beat by distribution.
Right.
Distribution is the key to the whole thing. That's how they beat self-publishing as well.
Yeah, it's amazing that if so many of those guys, the way they would be thriving today in the world of crowdfunding and print on demand and all that stuff, that the idea that they were always held back by the system.
Yeah, or even what DC tried to do in the early 70s, they came out with Swamp Thing, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, The Shadow, The New Gods, and the Forever People. They were really trying to grow this thing of what comics could be, not knowing that on the other end, on the distribution end, the stuff was going out the back door, and the sales weren't being reported, so they thought that the books were tanking. But it was the guys who were building the direct sales market had figured out how to go around the back of the building to the distributors, and they were buying the stuff in bulk, and then it was being reported as unsold.
Oh, yeah. When you read about the old distribution network, it's a wonder comic books, really made it out of the 50s at all, period, Yeah. And then there was that weird thing where DC actually controlled how many comics Marvel could put out for a while. And I remember when I learned that, it just seemed like that was like bizarro world. Like, wait a minute, how can your major competitor control how many titles you can release this year? But yeah, it's crazy.
That's because Superman, the success of Superman, gave Detective Comics enough money to start their own distribution, and this was independent news. independent news grew to become Warner Distribution. Warner Distribution went on to become Time Warner. This all grew out of Superman.
Crazy, isn't it?
There's a whole history there that people have kind of missed, like a subtext to it all. The history of superheroes and the superhero business that I think there's, I hope historians dig into it.
That's great.
So what's on your desk now? What are your do you see growing more doing the sort of the Amazon publishing model as opposed to trying to get to get in the shops? I mean, do you feel like there are pockets of people that are maybe stranded that don't know what you're doing over here? How do you combat that?
Well, there certainly are. And the fact that I was active through multiple generations of readers means that I've got potential readers, Swamp Thing, Turtles, Brat Pack, 63, that tasted me, over the decades. But the great thing about the Amazon Kindle thing is the books are up there for sale as backlist. So, like just doing this podcast, there'll be people out there who go, "Oh yeah, Rick Veitch, I remember him, and he's got books out. I'll just go to Amazon and get them, and I'll get new readers out of it that way." But I've got a core readership that pretty much buys everything. They especially seem to go for the King Hell Heroica stuff, MAXIMORTAL, and I'm going to do my best to finish the 5 graphic novel grouping that I've been working on since 1991.
So that is also remarkable that there's a storyline that's going that distance, and kind of, would you say, fits and starts, or is it more like as soon as you had the opportunity, you got right back into it, and it was always cooking the whole time?
Yeah, it was always cooking, but when distribution kind of forced me out, then the option became, well, can I get another publisher to take over, and I'll do the creative work, but they'll publish it, and talk to a lot of publishers about it, and a lot of them were like, yeah, Brat Pack, MAXIMORTAL, this is great. But then they start looking at it and they go like, well, we can't do that. We can change that, and so I just held on. I didn't want to compromise it. It's the one deep vision thing I really want to focus on. It's what I really have to say about superheroes.
Do you work with an editor now for the work you're putting on?
No, that's just me.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, I've got a question here from. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so how does your day work? Do you spend a certain amount of time dealing with the non-drawing, printing, technical business aspect, and then certain part of the day drawing, or certain days drawing? How do you manage all that?
I attempt to draw pretty much every day. Although, some days I've got doctor's appointments or family stuff I've got to do, but, my basic life is built around drawing every day. But I've learned to limit that time to about 4, maybe 5 hours. But it's deep focus time. I don't take phone calls unless it's some important business. I don't, I've got my family and friends trained to leave me be during those 4 or 5 hours. And I really focus and really get a lot of stuff done by not being distracted. I don't look at Facebook, or anything like that. And when it comes time to do the business side of it, I'll spend a day on business rather than try to do business and art and multitasking. I got Steve Conley to be the multitasker. But I used to do the all-nighters, in a 10-hour a day thing. And I just found that I can, just by focusing, I can get more done, and I feel a lot better. The work is better, and the stuff gets done.
Would you say that you learned that from Joe? How did Joe do that? How did he manage? Because he had his school and he had his own work and his family.
Joe is superhuman. I mean, physically superhuman. He would teach all day, run the studio at night, doing catalogs for the superhero enterprises and stuff like that. This is Joe Kubert, world's greatest cartoonist. Then he would go home and do like 3 covers, and he would show up at 8:30 the next morning, fresh as a daisy. I mean, wow. He was just unbelievably awesome. You know, he could do the stuff so fast. I assisted him on an issue of Sergeant Rock. He allotted 3 days, starting Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. We were done Saturday night. 24-page Sergeant Rock comic.
Wow. Now, I would take it that he didn't pencil very tight, that he sort of penciled tight enough that he could draw it when he inked it, right?
Yeah, he's sort of like Bassett, imaginary pencils. You know, just notations enough so to go down with ink. But he set up his drawing board with a light box in the drawing board. And he had this white tape that he had found somewhere in New York City. It was like, you know, this wide. And so he could make a patch. When he made a mistake, he would quickly, and the tape would take ink beautifully. That was what was amazing about this tape. And so he'd just slap it over the thing that was wrong, turn on the light box, ink over his thing that he didn't like, and it was fixed in seconds.
Wow. Amazing. Getting back to the question about the distribution, we're just talking about Kindle and KDP and Amazon's distribution. Eternitine Forever on the YouTube asks, is it something that you'd recommend to other indies creators? Like, is it something that other indie producers should use?
If I was younger and, you know, more rabid about things, I would be doing a monthly book on Kindle right now and building an audience that way. You know, I'm just, you know, I'm not going to work that hard anymore in my life. I don't feel like I have to, but I'm doing like 2 to 3 projects a year through Kindle, and it's building all the way. But the potential there is great, I think, and the package itself is beautifully done. Once you learn the software, I would recommend it to any young person starting. There's no, you don't have to put up any money up front. Basically, you start a book, it doesn't cost you a dime, just your time. So I think, you know, any young person would be a really good way to do it, I think.
Now, how do you get paid? Does it accrue weekly, monthly? Monthly. So they cut you a check every month, or direct deposit every month, a check?
Direct deposit every month. And there's a list of all the countries that KDP ships from. And so, you know, Japan, Australia, 3 or 4 countries in Europe, America, Canada, Mexico, I think Brazil as well.
And that's all in English, right?
Yeah, all in English. But what happens is I've got European publishers that do their own translated editions. So the same stuff I'm selling on Kindle, I'm making money, you know, publishing in Italy and in France.
So how do you do that? Do you basically give them the file and then they put the lettering on?
Yep.
On another layer, I guess,
Yeah, well, the digital stuff I can send in layered, and they can just, you know, do their own layer over it. But they're set up to translate stuff and, you know, bring it into the digital environment and white out the balloon and add the layer and stuff like that. They're used to that kind of stuff. Right.
Now, and this is only black and white, or are they moving towards doing color?
I'm only doing black and white now because the color, the economics of color, I don't like. Like to do a 48-page color book, which I did. I had to sell it for $12.95. And it's like, yeah, I wouldn't spend $12.95 on a 48-page book, you know. But a black and white book, I could give people 100 pages for $9.95 and still make a couple of bucks on it. You know, it's like, it's a real decent thing all around, and it's rugged, you know.
So it's sort of like the value you get when you buy. I think one of the things that the young manga readers like is that you get a brick of content. And for them, they never complain about black and white. The direct sales market hates black and white. The fans hate black and white. They want it to be in color. That was even during the black and white boom, people would always say like, "Oh, but this would be better if it was in color." There was such a resistance to the taste. But one of the things I know from teaching is that one of the things that the young people like is the fact that they can get a brick of entertainment. Like if you want to read Naruto, there's a bajillion volumes of Naruto. I guess it's probably with the Turtles now, right? Now that they have so many decades of the Turtles, right? You can do that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Like I haven't been doing shows for a few years, but I would have people come up and say just the opposite. That
Really?
they only read black and white comics. And the color comics just don't attract them. And a lot of it is because of the content of black and white comics is more experimental, feeds their heads with ideas that you're not going to get from Marvel and DC. And I think there's a hip sort of readership that's looking for that. That's what I was always looking for as a kid. That's what made Jack Kirby so great. Every issue was like something new, something you didn't know about before, some mythical thing that he was pulling together or some crazy science fiction idea. And I think black and whites do that better than, 17 covers for the latest issue of Batman.
There's something increased value of authenticity that's happened. That's really, I mean, if anything's happened in art in the last 25 years, it's that people really reject any look of corporatism about it, like that kind of over-rendered, very, I don't know, sterile work. And I think we want that. We had Ken and James on recently, whose work is black and white, and it's gritty, and it's awesome because of that. I think if it had a million lines on, I'm sorry, if every bit of it was beveled and shiny, it would look, I don't know, corporate. His stuff is cooler because it's like that. And I think that black and white has that kind of grit to it, which makes it realer somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it also, by doing it black and white now, it leaves the potential to be colored later.
Right.
Well, in France, they're doing MAXIMORTAL and they color it. So, I'm free of having to do it. And, it's like another way I get another payday for the same materials, which is great.
We got just a lovely comment here. Daniel Aslan on YouTube. While I have the opportunity to thank you, Mr. Veitch, for everything. Love you and your input, obviously. This has given me food for thought. Huge thank you.
That's nice. And here's one more because I want to start wrapping up, Rick, so you can go pee and go on about the rest of your evening. This is kind of bookmarking our conversation about distribution. Our good friend Patrick, what up, Patrick, says, speaking of distribution, thoughts on the shift from Diamond to Lunar by Image and what that says for the market these days. Any opinions on that, gentlemen?
Well, I would say that it continues the unraveling of the direct sales distribution. I think there's, the what's left of Diamond and these new distributors, they're in like this weird death dance with the retailers as the whole thing shrinks and the margins shrink. The real sales of comics are like Captain Underpants.
Yes.
Not Batman. So these guys have lost the game. They just don't understand it yet. And of course they've all got, their lives are invested in it. But I'm sorry to say they made some really, really bad decisions back in 1998, which is why Steve and I did Comic-Con.com. We were like that first generation trying to find a new way to do things. We didn't get it right, but since then, the whole thing has changed quite a bit. And the direct sales market has failed in its promise, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many bugs in the system, and the publishers as a whole rejected. Well, they rejected the Turtles, right? Or like they rejected manga. They rejected all these things that were coming down the pipe and now what you get is you get 47 versions of Batman because that's the only thing that they have. So they can't innovate because nobody's going to give them a new Batman. Nobody's going to give them a character. So they just keep doing these various versions of the same characters over and over and over again. And I sort of feel that, you have maybe 10 or 15% of the shops left are really good stores and they have a wide selection, but you still have too many stores that are basically Marvel DC stores and what I call like the baby man stores. And those guys they're not interested in new ideas or growth. It's like if it's not Wolverine and it's not Batman, they don't care. If you go in and if you're a kid who's watching something on Disney Plus and you go in, there's probably nothing in the store for you that you're going to be able to relate to because none of the Marvel and DC stuff actually reflect the stuff that's Disney's putting out. And the only way I feel that they could actually really save the business would be to spend millions of dollars with no guarantee that they could grow the market. They would have to branch out and put kiosks and free online content, take their old catalog and put it online for free as loss leaders to attract young readers. But I can tell you from being a teacher, what a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old is interested in reading is not what they're publishing. That's why, and then the younger kids, the feeders that are coming in are reading Jamar's book or Captain Underpants, those kids will never graduate to reading Spider-Man. Or maybe they'll graduate reading the Spider-Man that
Scholastic puts out a Spider-Man,
which already outsells the regular Spider-Man. So it's just this weird sort of death dance, like you're saying, where
the thing is though that at the grassroots level, there's this incredible creativity in comics, and the problem is that the business guys have somehow got a hold of the pipeline from the creativity to the readers, and so now this is what's made this mess. They cut us out.
Yeah. Well, I always say that if you look at the hundreds, it seems, of young cartoonists that are producing material, there's more cartoonists now producing material than ever before, right? It may not be, Marvel or DC or mainstream stuff, but you go online, you go on Webtoons, you see there's so many young artists. Or you go on Instagram, it's like endless. It's like a machine that just seems to be like making hundreds of new artists every day. Yet that creativity and that readership and that excitement is completely not being captured or used or shepherded by the old publishers. That model is. They're existing just to license out those characters. And if they start blowing tires and those movies stop making $1 billion,
So this has been a fantastic conversation, you guys. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are running quickly out of time. And as I say every week, where does the time go? Rick, you've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you for having me in, guys. Really had a blast.
So, Rick, where can people find you online?
Well, rickveitch.com. But, Amazon is the place to go. You know, I got an author's page. It has all my new books. I think I've got 19 titles out
Wow.
in the New Sun Comics.
Can we pull that up? Can we see that? Is there a way to pull that up so people can actually see that?
Steve, you want to do it?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right.
And I'm usually hanging around Facebook, you know, talking about my latest releases, or if I've got weird historical stuff I want to share, or you know, stuff like that.
And Rick, do you have a pretty active rapport with your Facebook friends?
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. It's great when creators, you know, mix it up with the people on their wall. I know a lot of people who just basically push out, but they don't receive it. You know,
Yeah.
so it's always great to see things like that.
So you think the Amazon model is better than doing Kickstarter?
Well, it's easier. You know, I think Kickstarter is another fantastic way of getting around, you know, the whole distribution mess. But the Kickstarter has its own mess in the sense of a lot of people are putting up money and then not seeing their projects, and a lot of stuff like that. But it looks to be a really great way. I don't really want to spend my time fulfilling orders, you know, like that. I want to spend my time creating art. And so the Kindle thing is a really good fit for me.
Okay, here we go.
Let's see if we get this to work. Boom.
Look at that.
There you go. Then do the scroll.
Yeah, so
Nice.
Tombstone hand. Stop there, Steve. So that's panel vision. And panel vision is like a new way I found of doing comics, at least for me, which one panel per page. And it kind of creates a different reading experience and a creative experience as well. And I've you know, I think I put out 5 titles under the panel vision thing. So if people are looking for something completely different in comics, that's a good place to start.
So do you sort of feel like panel vision is sort of like Prince Valiant? Because Prince Valiant wasn't like a traditional. It was comics, but it was also like a storybook at the same time, because you had all your narration. It didn't have word balloons.
Yeah, well, it's something about just having 2 panels in front of you as you open a book. I think I was mostly inspired by The Eyes of the Cat by Jodorowsky and Moebius, which I saw when I was in Europe just after it came out. And I was just like, I really love that format. But I was never able to convince an editor on this side of the world to get behind a project like that. So it's a perfect fit for me and the Kindle, because I don't have to worry about editors and distributors or anything like that. It's just me doing what I want to do, and hopefully, you know, readers picking it up and digging on it.
That's fantastic. And you know, I have always a little bit of pushback about Kickstarter, because even though I think it's a fantastic platform, there's so much work that you have to put into that to make it successful. And even Rick, like you spoke to just fulfilling orders. Like, it's fantastic you got this nut at the end of your Kickstarter, but now you have a garage full of books you got to ship. You know, nobody talks about that.
And they're like, these organizations are springing up to do that work for you. But again, it's like a middleman between you and your audience.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
You know, I guess I could say the same thing, that Amazon is a middleman, but the way they set it up is, boy, it's there's, you know, it really works well.
Right. I mean, but there's always going to be something in between you and the reader, unless they're reading your stuff online. If they're actually getting a physical book, unless you are printing the books yourself and, you know, stuffing the envelopes yourself. I mean, there's always some system between you and interface between you and the, you know. So what do you think about the online world? You know, what do you think about that? Do you think that will be more of the future? more.
Well, you know, that's part of what Comic-Con.com was about, was like trying to figure out what the online comics world wanted. And I don't think we ever got to it, because it ended up kind of spreading out into a number of different possible ways of doing it. I'm not as tight with it as I used to be, so I don't really understand who's making it work and who isn't. I know Steve's got a really great thing going with Middle Ages, but I'm not sure if anyone's had like a large success with online content, or if it's a thing of where you give away free content so that people will buy your T-shirts or stuff like that. I'm really not sure.
Well, are you familiar with webtoons? Do you look at that type of stuff?
I don't.
The ones who are successful, there's tons of them out there. There's so many. They're just, none of them are, they're not like all in one catalog going to the comic store every month. There's people with, bringing in thousands of dollars every month on their Patreon, and they're all, you never heard of them. They have their own community. It doesn't take a lot to, you see these Kickstarters that do amazingly well and they only have 500 backers. A comic that sells 500 copies in the store will be canceled. And here they are with these small audiences, small dedicated audiences, and it's awesome. It's just, we're all spread out, and there isn't, there are a few that are multi-million-dollar projects, but yeah.
I can remember in the mid 2000s, I think, doing a New York show, and all us independent publishers are set up and we're doing business, and we looked over and there's like this mob down at the other end, and we're like, what's that? And it was like XKC or
XKCD,
yeah, and it was like a lot of people just mobbing the guy, and he was coming off the internet.
Awesome. Yeah. We could keep talking, but I'm gonna stop. All right, guys, we're gonna put a pin in it.
Okay.
Rick, you were a fantastic guest. Don't disappear. We have a little thing we do at the end. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight. Just to know that we're here every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST. We have a fantastic guest coming on next week, Stephen DiStefano, who's going to be on the show. Mike, you want to say a quick little word about Stephen?
I've known Stephen a long time. He was actually, I interviewed him in an old issue of Draw, but he is the chief character designer on the new Gendy Tartakovsky cartoon that's on Cartoon Network, as well as one of the best all-around cartoonists today who works in, and he worked on Primal. He worked, I think, on, he and I actually both were working on the new Ren and Stimpy relaunch. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him.
Awesome, thank you. And Rick, I hope I'll see you in the chat next week. So, all right, you guys, we're going to say our goodbyes. Thanks so much to our guest, Rick Veitch. You're a fantastic guest. And to my co-host, Steve and Mike, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been soaking in it. This is Pencil to Pencil. And even though we're kind of over this pandemic, Rick, you're going to do this with us. Don't forget to wash those Kirby hands. Put those hands up. Oh, there you go. I like this little grip to it. Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Rick.
Right.